Welcome to the Seek Insights online event. This platform is a learning series designed to assist entrepreneurs and professionals in learning and development, as well as providing a platform to interact and engage the top 3% business, marketing, and technology talent in the world. We would like to help you access rare insights so you can thrive in your industry. Today we have quite an interesting speaker, Musa Kalenga. When uncertainty strikes, small businesses are the ones most likely to struggle to recover. South Africa is obviously a country with a unique set of socio-economic challenges preventing growth in the small business sector. This, coupled with the recent coronavirus pandemic, has resulted in major consequences for small business. Musa Kalenga joins us this evening, who is an enthusiastic entrepreneur and passionate about using technology to empower the digitally invisible. He is also the CEO of Bridge Labs. Today, Musa will be presenting AdaptNation, strategies for small business to survive during uncertainty. Welcome, Musa, and thank you so much for taking time to join us this evening.
Thank you so much, Samke. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. If you give me 2 seconds, we'll be ready to fly. All right. Firstly, well done to Samke and the team that have put this together. I think it's a very important initiative that helps small businesses and professionals to start wrapping our heads around just the state of where we are, not only as a country, but in our respective businesses and what we do. So this is particularly close to me because I'm an entrepreneur like many of you. And so we've had to go through a lot of iterations and changes in the last couple of weeks, like everybody else has. So I got thinking a month or two back about a model that I could create to effectively help other small businesses to try and navigate these uncertain times, because ultimately the world is not going to be the same. And for those that think it is, I've got a lot to tell you during this presentation. So there's going to be a lot of thinking that I've put together around models to pretty much arm you. So it's a bit of a toolkit to help small businesses start thinking about the world slightly differently, but more importantly, to start crafting the right kind of trajectory for them to get the right value post-COVID-19. And so I think a good place to start is just to take a lead from nature. And I'm one of those people that likes to reflect on various aspects of society in coming to some of the thoughts that I put together. And if we think about the way mammals were created and creatures on our planet, we were all created with very specific capabilities that allowed us to survive very adverse circumstances. If you think about the lion as an example, one of the most majestic cats on Earth, it's the speed, it's the strength, it's the ability to be able to kill at a ferocious pace. And as a result, it's been able to survive over the many years. One stat I did not know about the lion is that lions, especially male lions, we're quite a lazy species, but we take our cue from lions. So male lions spend about 70% of the time sleeping. And when they are awake, all they're doing is hunting and obviously, procreating. But what they do when they hunt is they hunt ferociously for short periods of time. And then the rest of the time they're sleeping. And so the way their bodies have adapted to that over time is to make sure that when they do hunt, the success ratio of how they kill is really high. And so that's part of how they've adapted as a cat species to be able to survive. Right through to like an elephant, which is the opposite. It's this massive, massive creature that moves typically a lot slower than a lion, but also because of its force and its size and its mass has got very different ways in which it's adapted to survive. For example, the texture of the skin of an elephant, the trunk, the way it's formed, the horns, all of that kind of put together is the reason why elephants have also continued to survive over the years. But if you think about another animal, which is not really sexy, right? It's one that's slow, it's not fast, it's not big, it's not strong, it's not powerful. But what it's been able to do is it's similarly also been able to survive all these years. And what it's been able to do, the chameleon, is that it's been able to find ways to be able to blend into the background and as a result go undetected. And that's been the reason why a chameleon has survived. So whether you're thinking about a lion or an elephant or even a chameleon, there's some very interesting principles around how we as human beings have to go on to survive. Those of you that are readers, check out a book by Yuval Harari, and he's a historian based in Israel. And he writes about pretty much the evolution of humankind and how humans went from effectively being food for dinosaurs to the top of the food chain. And a lot of what he speaks about is about the mechanisms we've been able to use as human beings to survive. Core to that have been the ability for us to communicate and the ability for us as humans to rally around common cause. And so much like the animals have shown you, we as human beings have also got the innate ability to survive. No matter how bad the scenario and the situation may seem, we will tend to come out on top. And so while I was going through my timelines and my news feeds, I found some really interesting quotes. The one that I really liked and that resonated a lot with me personally is by the President of the Republic of Ghana. Now, President Nana Akufo-Addo was quoted as saying, "We know how to bring economies back to life, but we don't know how to bring people back to life." And why this resonated with me is a lot of the work that I do and the things I talk about are really about having a more human-centric approach to the way we build businesses, to the technology that we use, and to pretty much the organizations that we have to build. And so this human-centered approach, which is about knowing and preserving humanity over everything else, is something that resonates a lot with me. We've seen exactly the same strategy being employed by our very own President Cyril Ramaphosa, with all the efforts around COVID-19 around the preservation of life. And I think that's a key thing that not only is important for us to know, but is integral in how we're going to be able to survive post-COVID. Another great quote that I saw perusing through my timelines is this one. It's a quote by someone who's anonymous, but I'm going to find out exactly who they are because they're pretty clever. And when I read it, I was like, wow, that's really profound. It pretty much says a sharp turn in the road is only dangerous if you forget to turn. Now, why that is so profound is that for me, it just sums up what we have to do as a response strategy during these times. It also made me think about Formula One. I'm a bit of a petrol head. Not a bit of a petrol head, I'm just a moderate petrol head. But one thing I did get to know, because my son used to race go-karts, is that when you're racing and you have to negotiate really sharp turns, there's three things you need to do. You need to go wide, and then you need to go into the bend, and then you need to accelerate out of it. And when you do that, you minimize how much speed you lose turning around a corner, but you also manage to negotiate the corner successfully. And why that's an interesting analogy is that if we look at COVID-19 being this amazing sharp turn in the road, which all of us are driving towards at 120 kilometers an hour, all of us in these wonderfully fast machines able to move at frightening speeds, the important thing is that the corner is not going to change. The turn in the road is not going to change. What has to change is the way we maneuver the technology we're in and the way we think about approaching that corner. So it's really key for us to keep these two things top of mind. The first is that we have to be human-centric in our approach to however we solve for COVID-19. The second thing is that this sharp turn that we're all facing is only going to be dangerous if we literally forget to turn. And forgetting to turn has got a number of implications, and I'll go through that in the presentation as we make our way through it. The other thing that I'd like to speak about today is effectively technology, right? I love technology. I think it's a great thing. I think there's lots of capabilities and opportunities with technology, but I also believe that technology has to pretty much serve humanity for us to get the best of it. But technology also has the fundamental capability to reframe the reality of the people on our continent. And if we think about it, technology really is the intersection of humanity and this capability to solve problems. And I think about this because if we bring these two things together, we are able to create what I refer to as new value. And new value means that when technology meets humanity, you're able to solve for things in a fundamentally different way, and you're able to create a new level of excitement and a new level of value. And if you think about what COVID-19 has done, is that across every aspect of economy, of society, and of behavior, things have changed. Right through from industry dynamics to regulation to geopolitics, all of it has fundamentally shifted. Human behavior, this low-touch economy now means that we have to do things fundamentally differently to how we did it in the past. And this may seem like a huge sharp turn in the road, but if we think about the intersection of where technology could meet humanity, then I think the possibilities start to become endless. And I think this is where we're often forced to be more creative about how we think about the scenario that we're in. And so this principle of new value is something that I talk about a lot in a few of my other keynotes, and it's pretty much framed around understanding how APIs work. And those of you that are not technically inclined, API is just a fancy term for code, right? Code that can speak to each other to create new things. And if you think about technology and humanity as code bases, when you integrate those two things, you can ultimately design and create new value. A platform that is a really great illustration of this is Uber. The Uber experience that you all see and that you all kind of interact with when you're going from place to place, is actually the sum total of about 37 different APIs coming together to create this new value, which then becomes Uber, which then becomes e-hailing. So the opportunity for us as value creators and entrepreneurs really is to think about this idea of new value and where we can find it and how we can unearth it and what we need to do from a capability perspective to really unlock that in the future as we go along. Another really important reflection point and data source is to look at the economy pre-COVID-19. Right? If we look at GDP growth in South Africa, it was really, really challenging. It was revised down, and we're actually on a really fragile road to economic recovery. In fact, GDP growth was below the forecasted rates before COVID-19. If you look at the inflation rates in South Africa, there was a massive need to stimulate lots of economies to be able to get higher and more inclusive rates of growth. At a 4.5% inflation rate, we were also not necessarily in the best place. And last but not least, the most challenging thing is the unemployment rate at 29%. This is a huge, huge concern, not only for our economy, but for places where we're trying to put young people into gainful employment. And so when we look at 29% unemployment, we have to stimulate industries that have got higher capability to absorb people that need employment and that need places to work. Now, there's a huge challenge as well that is coupled with unemployment, and that's the skills that we currently have within young people and the base of young people that are being employed. They're just not fit for the future that we're going into. So if we look at the economic picture pre-COVID-19, it wasn't rosy. And if we even take a higher view of the picture of Africa in relation to global economics, I don't know whether any of you know, but 17% of the Earth's population right now, by way of a head count, is actually from Africa. So 17% of the global population are Africans, as it stands now. But if you look at what the contribution is to economic activity, only 3% of African GDP is recorded against the rest of the world. So 17% world population, 3% GDP. That's phenomenal. But also what we need to know is that by 2030, I think they say, 1 in 5 people on Earth are going to be Africans. And if that is the case, what value are we starting to create and think about on a macro scale? Because the problem gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So if we look at the economy in South Africa as well as the African economy before COVID-19, it wasn't looking great. And so when COVID-19 hit, I'm sure a lot of you can probably attest, especially those of you that are in business, it was like getting punched in the face. And I never really thought I'd be quoting Mike Tyson in any of my presentations, but there's no real other way to sum this up, right? You've created these amazing plans, you've got your strategy in place, you've got your budget, you got your implementation, your ops plans, all of that is set, and you're good to go. Then all of a sudden, this invisible virus punches you in the face. And when that happens, it's important to realize what, number one, the human reaction is, but how that human reaction can very much be likened to how you should be reacting as a business. And we'll go through that in the 4 steps of the model that I've been able to create. And so AdaptNation really is about thinking about 4 phases of responding to being punched in the face. And the first thing you'll do, those of you that have ever been punched in the face or have ever been involved in high contact sports, the first thing that needs to happen when you get punched in the face, you need to stabilize, right? You need to realize what is going on, how you got hit, because you seriously demarcate at that moment. So stabilization is really important because as you stabilize, you're able to also assess what is going on. Because as someone has punched you in the face and you kind of stabilize and realize who it was, because you're busy seeing 5 or 6 different faces. The assessment is which is the right face I need to punch. And that assessment will allow you to be able to pivot, right? It means that I maybe need to adjust my stance, or I may need to be in a different position to be able to respond. And then hopefully you'll be able to grow with your strategy. You'll be able to respond in a way that makes sense. So the AdaptNation framework really helps us to respond to getting punched in the face, but punched in the face in the sense that our businesses and our economy have been really taken through the ringer. And so I'll go through each one of these individually, and I'll try and give you an anecdotal sense as well as a tool to help you think about what that actually means for you and your business. So when we talk about stabilization, I think the critical thing that we need to understand is that the process of stabilization is literally after you've gone through something that's traumatic, how you get yourself back to being yourself, right? And the quicker you can get yourself back to being yourself, the better. And so I created a little model starting with this understanding of the 3 economic scenarios that we are likely to face. I'm sure a lot of you have read up on this. It's been published widely. This is probably going to be one of the 3 economic scenarios that the South African economy is likely to face. The first one is called the V-shaped recovery. Now, the V-shaped recovery means that there's going to be a phenomenal shock impact in the beginning. And then there's going to be a fairly swift recovery, the Nike swoosh, which means that we're going to come out of a really challenging situation and we're going to recover to GDP rates before, and et cetera, et cetera. And then we'll get to complete recovery within the next 3 to 6 financial quarters, which is going to be important because if we can get to recovery quicker, it means we can move back to a more normally functioning economy. The next shape is called the U shape, right? So initially you have the shock impact, but what happened here is that there's a bit of a sustained recession. And so this recession has got really low GDP levels over several quarters. So this could take up to 2 years for it to normalize again. And at least 2 full years will be realized before we can get back to the value of GDP that we had before the impact. And then the third economic curve, which is really the challenging one, is the severe impact. So you've got this drastic fall in the beginning, but then you've got this prolonged recession that happens over a long period of time. And it's really difficult to bring your country's GDP back out of that without some severe and some drastic macroeconomic policy. So these three curves are likely to be the ones that are going to be impacting our economy. And so the trick is to think about which one applies to South Africa as a starting point. If you reflect on how this has worked in many many global pandemics before, one of the countries that experienced the L curve and never really covered was Greece. One of the countries that experienced the U curve was a country like Canada. So they had a shock impact. That was the USA, and then the mild impact was Canada. They managed to turn things around really quickly. So we've got data from previous pandemics that shows us how countries can do this, and there are very specific ways they think about that, because the actions that you start to do as a country in relation to the curve you believe you're in are really important. So the first point from an entrepreneur's perspective is have a point of view on what curve you believe the country is going to be going on, right? Number one. Number two, you take your point of view, and in my case, I believe that the country is likely to be in a U-shaped recovery, and I juxtapose that against what curve I believe my sector or my industry is likely to be in. Now, being in the technology space, software engineering is one of the companies I run, as well as advertising and comms is one of the business I invested in. I believe the technology business will recover in more of a V-shaped recovery. Now, it's important to know that the V-shaped recovery will be driven by the actions that we take as a leadership and an executive team that run the business, but it is very possible for us to bounce back quickly. But against the backdrop of an economy that's going through a U-shape, it is still important that we believe that we're going to have a different curve. So the very simple way to think about this is that even in times of recession, there are companies that do well. So I saw a stat the other day, I think it was Mark Zuckerberg, whose net wealth went up by $250 billion or something ridiculous like that during COVID-19. If you look at the numbers that Zoom has been quoting, the platform that we're broadcasting on now, through COVID-19, it meant that their share price has pretty much gone through the window. In fact, they're probably sitting about 40% of South Africa's GDP in one business, right? So it is very possible that there's one economic curve and a different sector curve. So the first thing you do as an entrepreneur is make sure you've got a point of view on both, because having a macro view and a sector view will help you to plan for what I call your next day and your next week actions. So your immediate actions are then, what are the likely things that you need to do considering the economic scenario that applies to your sector? So you need to create a list of impactful actions that you can implement the following day. I remember when COVID-19 kind of came into full effect, our software engineering business took some very clear decisions about what we were going to do the following day. Now, these next day decisions, as I call them, are impacted only by you. So you can decide without necessarily consulting widely, without necessarily impacting anything else, that you can make those decisions really quickly and move things along. And then you've got next week decisions. And next week decisions typically will be the second level of stakeholder that you have to consult. So this may be clients, it may be people in your value chain, it may be suppliers, it may be the kind of the broader stakeholder universe that you have in your business. But these immediate actions, the next day and the next week actions, start to move you in the direction to align with a curve you believe that's going to apply to your sector or your industry. It's also important to start thinking about the different horizons that apply to your business, right? If you think about value over time, there's some really interesting design and innovation thinking. And there's an article by Brian Alexandros who speaks about these three kind of horizons. The first horizon being, you need to, as a business, be able to defend and extend your current core business, right? So you can't start doing lots of other fantastic things until you've secured home. You need to secure the bag, as they call it, but in your core business. The second horizon is that you can start to build momentum towards new and emerging business ideas. So the things that you think you could really extend from your product into new customer segments. So you're not reinventing the wheel, you're just finding different people to sell to. And then the third horizon is creating an option for future businesses, right? Things that are kind of a little bit further out, but also could be strategically important because of the way the world is going and the way things are changing. And if you plot against those two horizons with the market on the one axis and the technology on the other axis, it really creates a very simple map for anybody to follow, even a small, medium business. So if you think about the markets that you'll service, there's an existing market that is the people that are currently paying you to do what you need to do. You then have what they refer to as emerging markets. So that's adjacent growth opportunities. So it's people that you can sell the thing that you already do well. And then you've got new markets where you're exploring potentially new customers with new things to sell to. And on the technology front, you can obviously implement mature technology, so stuff that's tried and tested, SMS type technology, email, that's tried and tested. So selling the stuff that you've already sold to existing customers, that's your sustaining, that's your defending horizon. And you can do that by just making marginal improvements, finding cost efficiencies, reductions, extensions. So you just provide an incremental value, but you're making sure that you secure the bag. The next horizon is about emerging technology and new opportunities. So trying to figure out what the next generation of products, services for the core markets that you have. So you've got a customer base you serve. What are they going to need? How are the things that they're doing evolving? How can I meet that need in 2 years or 3 years' time? And then the new technology space really is about transforming your business. It's about being visionary about how things will be in 5, 10, 15 years' time, and starting to craft the journey to getting towards that place. And this is a really clear and simple way to think about the horizons against which you think apply your sector curve. So if you believe you're going to be in a prolonged L shape in your sector, you need to figure out how you're going to approach these 3 different horizons and have a strategy in place for each of them. Now, when I was at Facebook, we had a very interesting view, and I didn't understand how it worked at the time, but we had a very clear 3 horizon strategy when I was still there, and that was probably about 4.5, 5 years ago. Horizon 1 for Facebook at the time was what we referred to as platform. So secure the platform that we had. So Facebook was transitioning from being a desktop platform to mobile platform. So make sure our technology is stable. Make sure that the experience for our core user is fantastic. Make sure that our ad platform works and it's absolutely world-class. That was the first 3 years. The next 3 years were all about products. So they decided to invest very heavily in Messenger, in the search functionality. They made acquisitions into Instagram, they made acquisitions into WhatsApp. That was all in Horizon 2, which is about products. We've got a stable ecosystem. The next phase is how do we find adjacent growth? Same customers, new products that we can sell them, and we can buy some, but we can also build some internally. And then the third horizon was effectively what they referred to as new spaces. And new spaces was like Oculus Rift. It was about AI. It was about machine learning. It was about all those really interesting spaces that are going to be of the future. And so this works if you look at big business, but it also equally works for small businesses. It's a very clear and simple model. And I think it's great to apply with a good sense of which economic curve you believe we're on and which sector curve you believe your business to be in. Another really important thing for you to do when you're stabilizing is to reallocate your buckets, right? And so typically what's interesting to know is that the buckets are usually the same. So COVID-19 or no COVID-19, you generally have 3 buckets, but you need to reallocate them to respond correctly. Bucket number 1 is all the things that are essential, right? Absolutely required for you to continue going as a business. These things you cannot compromise on. So you need to make sure that you're clear about what goes into bucket 1 that is absolutely essential and it's a non-compromisable. Bucket number 2 is strategic. So they may not be immediately essential, but in a few years' time or in a few months' time, they may be of extreme strategic importance. And then bucket number 3 are nice to haves, right? So these can be deferred for undisclosed periods of time, so you can come back to them at some point. You can think about it later on. And so you need to match that up with where you're at as a business and be clear about what buckets you're in. Now, what's great about the bucketing exercise is it also allows you to be very clear about where you focus your energy and your time. One of the big things about COVID-19 and any disaster of this nature is because you're so disheveled about what's happening, you need very clear guidelines as to where your efforts are going to go and why they're going to go there. So for small businesses, this reallocation of buckets is really useful as a very simple tool to help you guide yourself and keep yourself accountable. And so the next stage of the model is really about assessment, right? So we spoke about stabilization. You've been punched in the face. So let's kind of figure out where we're at, what curve are we on, what horizon are we going to play to, and what's the strengths there, and what kind of buckets, what decisions are we making? That's step 1. Step 2 is the assessment piece. And the assessment piece is really about 2 axes, and it's about understanding, seemingly obvious but really important variables. First one being your implementation agility, right? And the implementation agility is a look in the mirror and an honest conversation about your ability to respond, right? As a business, how quickly do we honestly believe we can respond? And in responding, how quickly do we think we can transform our business and change our operation standards? Our implementation agility is fundamental to us being able to be nimble and agile, as they call it. Those are the fancy terms they use. So implementation agility is really the principle that the fast will eat even the fast will eat the big, right? So the guys who are able to move quicker will be able to eat the guys that are bigger, that have been around for a longer time, that have done this thing for 99 years. They can't respond. They're very sluggish in how they move. But the fast will eat the slow. And so secondly, you need to think about mental resolve, right? And mental resolve, once again, is just pretty much, have you made peace? And I know it sounds a little bit airy-fairy, but for business leaders and for people that are running businesses, making peace with the fact that we are where we are and that things are not going to change, and we need to make sure that we are geared to be able to deal with things in a fundamentally different way is important. Because I often see people that are very nostalgic about when things go back to when they used to be, or one day when the world goes back to normal. It's not going to be like that. And so for me, that's your mental resolve. It means that you might still be hanging on to this thing. I believe the world will revert back to maybe 20 to 30% normality, but everything else is going to be fundamentally different. And so if you plot implementation agility and mental resolve on a 4-axis scale, four interesting quadrants emerge. The first one is what I refer to as the rocking chair, right? So these are people that have got a high implementation agility. So they're doing stuff, but they haven't made peace with the fact that the world is different, right? And they're still reminiscing about the fact that we can go back to how it used to be. And so this rocking chair effect means that you're moving back and forth, but you're actually not moving. You're not actually progressing. And so you're kind of in this movement, but you're not really progressing the business. The second quadrant, which is low implementation agility as well as low mental resolve, is what I call the pity party. This is the area of stagnation. So you're not moving quickly. You've got no ability to transform your business internally. And in your mind, you're still thinking that the world's going to go back to being the way it was. This is the worst quadrant to be in because you actually are stuck. It's a paralysis almost to be in this quadrant. The third quadrant is what I refer to as the compliant, right? These are the guys that are complacent but have done all the things that they needed to do. So in their minds, they know, geez, the world is different now. It's actually not going to be the same. But their business hasn't necessarily taken the things to respond, to change their business operation, to think about things differently, and to start charting a new journey. So they're kind of compliant, but they're still very much complacent. They're not really doing anything fundamentally revolutionary. And then quadrant 4 is kind of this reinvention space. So the guys that are ready to thrive, they've got the combination of high implementation agility, so they can make decisions, change things, and then move, and then they can reinvent the way they do things within their business and change the operational standard. Then you've got the high mental resolve. They're like, you know what, actually, this is never going to be the same again. We just have to try and do things differently, and we need to make the changes happen quicker. Now, it goes without saying that you'd want to be in quadrant 4. You want to figure out as an organization, how do we assess which one we are in, and how do we navigate ourselves to getting towards quadrant 4, where we're in the reinvention space. And that space is really interesting to occupy, because that's where a lot of innovation starts to happen. And sometimes innovation can be, the I word, which everyone is scared of, and it could mean a million different things, but I went and I found a very simple way to boil it down. And the clever people at Harvard, have got this really very, very simple model. It's about 4 types of innovation. Now, all of you that thought innovation was broad, it boils down to these 4 squares. And innovation is about understanding 2 things. Number 1, how well is the problem that you're trying to solve defined? Right? Simple. Is it well defined or is it not well defined? Are you trying to solve for going to the moon, or are you trying to solve for selling knickknacks at the corner of the street? The second thing is, how well is the domain defined? Is space travel a well-defined domain? No, it's not. Are car washes a well-defined domain? Yes, they are. So you need to think about how well your domain is defined, as well as how well your problem is defined. And if you understand those 2 things, you'll either fall in one of these 4 quadrants. Now, I was doing this presentation last week to a call center, a debt recovery call center for FNB that are interesting, because they're finding out that there's a new wave of services that comes out during this time, and they've had to do partnerships with FNB, yada, 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 yada. So I went through this process with them, and I tried to figure out a way to give them an understanding of where they fell. And they fell within the sustaining innovation space. Their problem is extremely well defined, right? So they pretty much have to collect debt for people that defaulted. That's very clear, as well as the domain. So debt collection as a domain, call centers as well as contact centers have been around since 1930 or whatever it is. So there's been a lot of work and energy and knowledge that's gone into that. So both their problem and their domain are well defined. And so for them, the big thing is about road mapping, creating an R&D lab within their business, understanding how their product evolves over time, so some design thinking principles, as well as potentially acquiring smaller businesses, right? The other thing I told them to think about there is also collaboration, right? So there's a value chain that's emerging that they didn't know before. And now as they solve this problem, they realize that we can probably collaborate with other people. So thinking about where you kind of fall in the 4 quadrants, as far as your implementation agility and your mental resolve, should allow you to be able to navigate towards quadrant number 4, which is about reinvention and ready to thrive. And when you're in that quadrant, you map yourself as to where you think you are. Breakthrough innovation, basic research, disruptive innovation, or sustaining innovation. All of these are quite simply explained by how well your problem is defined and how well your domain is defined. So once again, a very simple tool for you to reflect on, given where your business is at and where the opportunities may present themselves. So a key question that small businesses and entrepreneurs need to be asking themselves is, what does your business model look like post-COVID-19? Right? So this is a very simple sounding question, but the questions that, the models that precede the question will allow you to start thinking about, hey, actually, what does it look like? And does it look the same as what it looks like now? Because ultimately, things should be fundamentally different. In fact, a lot of CEOs have been interviewed and asked lots of questions about COVID-19 as a whole. But the one thing that I found interesting regarding this question, which is the statement that best characterizes the way CEOs are communicating within the organization, 70% of these CEOs said that their communication was all about the restoration of balance, which is interesting. And restoration of balance really is a higher order thing. And you think about these guys from the top 500 companies in the US, and you think about restoration being a little bit of a soft metric. You thought they'd be talking about ROI or EBITDA or something along those lines, but they're talking about this is a time to restore balance. And so as we reflect on our business models, it really is an important process of kicking the tires around how much we are fit for purpose for the future that we're going into. I'm sure you've all seen the anecdotes about the world resetting itself, or the world restoring itself. And there were all these narratives in different sectors of the economy before COVID about impact investing, which is spending your money more wisely. The narrative around environmental control, the narrative around participating as responsible citizens, wellness, all of these were narratives that were related in some way or form to this notion around balance. So I put it to you guys today that a big part of businesses that are going to survive going forward are going to have to think about balance in the context of what their business brings to the economy, as well as what they bring to their communities that they serve. I mean, if these guys are concerned about this being a time to restore balance, surely we should all be thinking about that as small business owners, as well as entrepreneurs within the economy that we're in. And so when you think about the stabilization, the assessment, the important thing to go next into is about the pivots, right? So you boxed in the face, you stabilize, you kind of get your bearings, you assess how many faces hit you, and then you pivot, right? So you move into the next position to take your to make your punch. And what the pivot is really, the model I've put together anyway, is about understanding your point of departure. So when you pivot, it's very much those of you that have played sport, right? When you make a very quick turn. So those of you that play basketball or netball, when your foot hits the ground and you pivot and you go off in a different direction, the ground that you pivot from is really important. So if it's uneven, you can actually break your leg. So pivoting from a solid ground is really important. So you have to assess what ground you're pivoting from in order to know what direction you're going into. And so the model that I've put together thinks about that. It thinks about where are we starting from as we pivot so that it can inform our directional, the trajectory as far as the energy we need to put in. So we think about two things. We think about proficiency and we think about the depth of relationships. Proficiency, very broadly defined about how well do you do the thing that you say you do, right? So people pay you for a product or a service. And so you need to understand, am I really proficient around delivering this? Do I do it like well? And if I do it really well, are people confirming that I do what I do really well? That's a very important thing. The value you create needs to be validated by people that are consuming your value. The second piece is around relationships. Now, relationships drive business. And those of you that have been in business for a while will know that the maintenance and the care and the clarity around relationships can actually unlock a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs and small businesses. So what happens if you put proficiency against an axis with relationships? Well, there's three interesting scenarios that emerge. The first is that you start to see where startups fall. Those of you that have recently started a business will know that you're probably still testing your values, probably still checking, are people going to consume my wonderful vegan pizza? Are people going to use my app? Are people going to so your proficiency is typically quite low. Because you're introducing something new or you're trying to solve a problem for the first time, your proficiency level is not expected to be high, nor are your relationships. You don't have a defined customer base. You don't have any stakeholders really. You don't have a network of influence. You don't have any of that. So your low proficiency and your shallow relationships put you in this quadrant. Similarly, there are what I call high value legacy organizations, and the South African economy has a lot of these companies. I call them, brokers. So insurance brokers are what I refer to as high value legacy organizations. You've got a book of business, you've been selling to them for the last 15 years. You might be waiting for them to die. No one's going to judge you. But effectively, you're getting monthly recurring revenue. What that does over time is it makes your sales muscle quite lazy. And so while you've got high proficiency, you understand financial planning, you understand how to sell people products, you understand the financial system, you've got a good proficiency. The challenge is that you probably have shallow relationships because you haven't shifted and moved your business into a new market segment. You haven't started thinking about collaborations and partnerships differently. So while you've got high value, you've got very, very shallow relationships in general, right? And then we've got this quadrant here, my favorite quadrant, our tenderpreneurs. Now, don't be offended if this is you. Offense is taken and not given, so I'm just talking about 4 quadrants. So you do with it as you may. But this quadrant is about tenderpreneurs who tend to have very low proficiencies, and they tend to have very deep relationships. So if you think about the typical profile of a tenderpreneur, they have a tender for toilet paper, then they have an event tender. Well, that tender may not be going so well right now. Then they'll have a tender to supply flyers, and they have a tender for this and the next. So they've got all these tenders, right? They actually don't do anything fundamentally themselves. They generally partner with someone else or whatever it is. So as a tenderpreneur, your strength is really in the depth of your relationships. Why? Because you know everybody at the Department of Finance, da-da-da-da-da-da. So depth of relationship plays out very well generally for tenderpreneurs. But the proficiency that they have in delivering services and products is really low. That's why often they partner with other people to help them do the thing that they can't really do, right? So this quadrant is interesting to look at. And if you remember what I said, is that these are all pivot points, right? So think about the point from which you're starting and the point to which you need to pivot to. And then the promised land, high proficiency as well as deep relationships. These are high impact entrepreneurs. They pick up the phone, they call the president, and the president says, okay, well, I can help you, so I can support you, and I can vouch for you. And then he delivers an amazing machinery or delivers an amazing solution, and it works, and it actually makes the things make sense, and it actually fixes the problem. Those are high impact entrepreneurs who can get things done through depth of relationship, but a very, very clear and a very well-respected level of proficiency in terms of what they deliver. So as you think about the pivot in your own business, consider where you are, consider what your starting point is, and consider which direction you need to go. Then this needs to be laddered up against the other models I've given you. So the horizons you tend to go to, the kind of things you need to be thinking about around where your business is in terms of impact, in terms of mental resolve, as well as your implementation agility. All of those kind of ladder up to a strategy that you can think about to be a little bit more responsive. So how startups will try to navigate, they'll be trying to move into the high impact space, or they'll try and become high value legacy organizations. Both of those moves make sense for a startup because either way, you're increasing your proficiency or you're deepening your relationships. It makes a lot more sense. High value legacy organizations typically need to find new markets, new customers, new places to play. And so they typically try to deepen relationships and they try and move into this high impact space, which is also quite important. And then tenderpreneurs obviously are trying to develop a lot of proficiency. So get good at doing something and deliver it really well, and then complement the depth of your relationships with what you do. So that's the really interesting pivoting from and to model that you can think about. Those of you that have obviously following the news will know that Exclusive Books now delivers books with Uber Eats. And this is typically by all of them sitting down and thinking about what position are they at and where do they want to pivot to. And in that pivot to, they thought about directionally, who do they partner with? Who do you collaborate with? Who do you speak to be able to do things differently? And so Exclusive Books and Uber Eats realized that, well, people still probably want to read, and these people have got an infrastructure for delivery. So if we work together and we pivot off the fact that we've got an amazing stock of books, they pivot off the fact that they've got an amazing depth of relationship with drivers and an infrastructure with the Uber platform, it makes a lot of sense, right? So they've all pretty much sat down and thought about where they're pivoting from and had a really constructive conversation with a partner to be able to pivot to somewhere. And that's the value you can create. That's the new value that you can create. And so a lot of you have also heard this statement, no mass gatherings means the death of events. And it's interesting because if you think about it that way, it actually constrains your thinking. If you think about it differently, it may liberate your thinking. And I found a really interesting case study that says the opposite. And those of you that have got children will know this game called Fortnite. Fortnite is a phenomenal game. I don't play it. Fortunately, my children don't play it yet. But I've heard that teenagers are glued to their screens playing this thing all day, all night. But what Fortnite did is they managed to arrange a Travis Scott concert. And this Travis Scott concert had 27.7 million unique players tune in to the concert, where people are saying mass gatherings are dead. mass gatherings are not dead. They've just shifted into a different format. And if you're not in that format, of course, you're going to struggle to be able to figure out how to create value. But this is a very classic example, and this happened in the middle of COVID-19. Now, by any imagination, 27 million people gathering for anything is phenomenal by any measure. But thinking about it in the context of having made peace with the fact that the world is different, and having had the implementation agility and the presence of mind at Fortnite to go, let's partner with someone who can bring together a crowd, and let's provide the technology to work together to change the narrative. So I'll play you the short video. I think it might play just to give you a sense. It's very quite weird, but you'll get the idea. So anyway, if any of you are interested, you can go and watch that video. It's available online, but also you can watch the case study and how it all unfolded and how it played out. So in order for you to make the decisions that navigate you between these different quadrants, in order for you to start understanding how you drive exponential change, there's a theory I write about in my book. Please get a copy on Amazon, Scribd, Loot, Takealot, any of those platforms. You can actually get the book and think about the decisions that are required to move you in between quadrants. So if you're going to move from a startup to high-value legacy organization, or move from a entrepreneur to being an impactful business entrepreneur, high-impact entrepreneur, then you're going to have to make very different decisions. And so the way the ladders and trampolines model really lands is that ladder decisions are incremental decisions. So they'll lead you to get a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. Whereas trampoline decisions will lead you to exponential results. And so as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, you need to be able to weigh up what are trampoline decisions versus ladder decisions. Because it's fine to make ladder decisions as long as you know you're only going to get incremental value. Whereas sometimes with exactly the same effort, you can get exponential value. And so it's really important for us to think about that as we try and make sure that we're fit for purpose. And when we think about proficiency and the relationships that we're in, about how we drive our businesses forward. And so the last piece of the puzzle is really about growth. And growth, I think holistically, in fact, it's about thriving and thriving post-COVID. And so when I thought about growth, it was really important to consider, in my mind anyway, that there's 3 pillars to growth. And these pillars need to be solved for during COVID-19 for them to actually have any effect post-COVID. And the first pillar is really about leadership. And in my businesses, we've been spending a lot of time giving our middle management, that missing middle layer, giving them a lot of support, giving them a lot of opportunities to be able to think about our business, give us new ideas, give us new directions, and really to come to the fore, to give them extraordinary opportunities to be able to solve extraordinary problems in a very extraordinary context. So leadership is really key. The second thing is the processes that we have. And one thing that entrepreneurs do very badly is what needs to happen in your head, and you get frustrated because you give someone the thing to do and he doesn't do it the way you want to do it, because you know how it needs to work because you have it in your head. The important thing is that we need to realize how to take those processes and codify them, and make sure when you've codified them, you get buy-in from anyone that is impacted by that process. And then you can use that process to actually liberate them, to give them an ability to work autonomously, to do what they need to do, to be able to, move without being felt like they need to always come in and check in and do that kind of thing. Because through this new normal, as they call it, work from home, as an example, is going to be something very normal. And in fact, our processes need to liberate people, not constrain them. Because if we've got this new normal and we've got these old processes, then we're going to create more frustration and friction. And so our processes need to be fit for purpose. They need to liberate and not constrain. And then we can apply technology. And I think this is where really the technology kind of piece comes full circle, is that after you've thought very deeply around the people in your business as well as your processes, technology complements that, right? So when you apply technology, you can get better reporting, a high level of efficiency, you can communicate really well, you can monitor projects and manage timelines, all that kind of stuff. In fact, in our business, we made the shift. I used to lose a lot of email to communicate, and I'm a millennial, so emails for me are just what emails are. So send an email, consider it done. But I work with a lot of Gen Z, and the Gen Z guys don't really work like that. In fact, they think emails are like super official. It's like me receiving a letter is like them receiving an email, kind of in a weird way. So when I sat down and I tried to understand it, I realized that we needed to change fundamentally the technology we had. So we then moved to things like Slack, to Asana, and to platforms where they can work autonomously, but I can still get a good sense of productivity and how things are going. So these are really important to have in place for you to be able to thrive post-COVID-19. And really, it's driven by the fact that there's a new idea of a CBD. Like CBD used to be driving down to center. Now it's everybody's personal workspace. And in everybody's personal workspace, there needs to be a new rules of engagement. In fact, in terms of your teams during COVID-19, make sure that you have more check-ins because people are spending a lot of time on their own. And so this notion around depression and wellness becomes really important. In our business, it was interesting because there's people that have children and those that live alone. And over a period of time, those that live alone get depressed, they get lonely, they get all that. Those of us that have kids, geez, we always, it's always on. So it's very different paradigms, but you need to be able to show up for them so that you can check in more and they can feel like they're part of what needs to happen. Scheduling, preparation for meetings, that kind of thing, it's really important. And the avoidance of micromanagement is really important, and also leading with authenticity. Through these times, nobody has the answers. What we've had to do regularly is kind of call everybody together and go, hey guys, we actually don't know, but we think we can do ABC. And so that authenticity has really allowed us to also listen and take what people are saying and help them to kind of flourish in this kind of new CBD that happens to be the home that they live in. So it's really important to show up for your team in a way that makes sense, but also for you to keep the business going and remain productive. And then last but not least, I'll speak about an interesting quote, which for me is a great way to summarize and kind of bring full circle. I started speaking about animals and I ended up here. But Charles Darwin really speaks about, it's not the strongest of species that survive, nor the most intelligent. It really is the most adaptable to change. And so when we think about change in our own businesses, it's going to be that ability to be able to navigate and mobilize ourselves to be able to do things slightly differently. And so, a big part of that change is going to be getting a daily mantra to lead you through everything that needs to be done. And so thinking about assessing, pivoting, stabilizing, and growth is going to be how you will be able to navigate it a lot better.
Thanks so much, Musa. That was really insightful and I think quite, in depth. So some people were asking questions, but you eventually answered them as the chat went on. But one of the questions that we have here is, will job creation not come from scalable medium enterprises that can create entry-level upskillable jobs? That was the one question that we had. Absolutely will.
That's the only way. If you think about the structure of the South African economy, you're not going to be able to create another SAB tomorrow. You're not going to be able to create another Standard Bank tomorrow. So those JSE listed companies have their role to play. But in as far as impact, bottom line impact, it's absolutely going to come from small, medium enterprises, and even the medium to corporate size are the ones that are transitioning. So yeah, that's absolutely right.
All right. And then another question is, do you foresee businesses that aren't willing to change in order to obviously accommodate a lot of the technology that has come out of COVID-19? Do you see them either, not dying, but potentially stagnating or altogether? Or do you think there's still an opportunity for them, particularly traditional types of businesses?
I think they're dying. Stagnating is a very politically correct way to say dying, but yeah, they're dying. Where there's stagnation, there's no movement. Where there's no movement, there's death. So just go to a swamp and see what's happening there. So I think they're going to die, right? And I say that respectfully. And you also need to consider, look at Dion Wyatt, that before COVID-19 had to close its doors for trade. If you look at the Barcos brothers, had to close their doors because of COVID-19. You look at a lot of Spur stores were threatening to close down, and even the franchise was thinking about closing. So these are established businesses that have been around for a long time. Now, yes, given, and even Edcon, another classic example, given they've been struggling for a long time. And so when COVID-19 came, it was pretty much the death knell. But effectively, the principle is still the same. If you're not able to move quickly, that implementation agility, if you're not able to make decisions and be able to adopt technology, you're going to unfortunately become irrelevant. So at the best case, you will lose a lot of market share. At the worst case, you will close down.
All right. Thank you so much, Musa, for chatting to us today. I think everybody's enjoyed the session. Any words that you'd like to leave our audience with?
Aside from the fact that you must not forget to turn, I think try and keep yourself inspired and motivated. I think it's a tough time for everybody. There isn't a silver bullet to making this thing get any better, but keep yourself inspired, keep yourself motivated, whatever that takes, be it family, be it friends, be it whatever. So I think we can and we will make it through it, but we all need to find deep within ourselves that inspiration and that motivation.